Breaking news this Monday night. America's longest war is over.
I'm here to announce the completion of our withdrawal from Afghanistan.
The international pressure on the Taliban to let Afghans escape safely. The chaos of Hurricane Ida.
I've seen damage, but not like this.
Where the storm is heading next. Greenhouse gas emission goals, how Canada's target compares to other countries, and how the Conservatives' plan stacks up. Plus, game changer, China's new rules for playing video games online.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news out of Afghanistan, where it is August 31st. After 20 years, America's longest war is now over. The U.S. military has completed its withdrawal. Afghanistan is officially in the hands of the Taliban. The Pentagon says the final U.S. evacuation flight left Kabul 1 minute before midnight local time. The American ambassador was among those on board.
Tonight's withdrawal signifies both the end of the military component of the evacuation, but also the end of the nearly 20-year mission that began in Afghanistan shortly after September 11, 2001.
More than 123,000 people have been safely flown out of Afghanistan. We believe there are still a small number of Americans, under 200 and likely closer to 100, who remain in Afghanistan and want to leave. We're trying to determine exactly how many.
This video was taken tonight on the streets of Kabul. There are reports celebratory gunfire could be heard across the city. Earlier in the day, a series of military flights took off from Kabul's airport as U.S. forces scrambled to wrap up their withdrawal. Thousands of vulnerable Afghans, including those who helped the Canadian military, have been left behind. Redmond Shannon has tonight's top story on the historic American withdrawal and the chaos left behind.
Just hours before the U.S. departure from Afghanistan was complete, another airstrike against the so-called Islamic State, this time on a car that had fired rockets toward Kabul airport. The Pentagon says Sunday's strike killed 2 militants, but reports say 10 civilians died in the explosion, including 6 children.
Nobody wants to see innocent life taken. We take it very, very seriously.
Further bloodshed will not help the West's efforts to convince the Taliban to cooperate in evacuations after Tuesday's deadline. Western foreign ministers met to discuss just how that will be done. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Canada will pressure the Taliban to get everyone out.
This is something we will continue to do into the coming months alongside our allies and our partners.
On Monday, the Globe and Mail reported that Ukrainian special forces went into Kabul Friday to escort 19 Canada-bound Afghans to the airport. But with all foreign troops now gone, one former Canadian interpreter told Global News all he can do is pray.
We are here about even more than 100 families in this area, and the Taliban know about that we are in here. So we hope they will not say anything to us and they will not do anything to us.
In New York, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution to allow safe passage from Afghanistan.
The turf outside the airport, the gates are run by the Taliban, so they will select who gets to get through.
Security expert Stephen Seidemann says the Taliban won't want to let other countries decide who gets to leave.
We're not going to be able to get out of the country everybody who wants to leave. You might see large numbers of refugees fleeing Afghanistan and ending up in camps in Pakistan.
As 2 decades of NATO's power and influence in Afghanistan now comes to an end. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
This is a view from a Coast Guard helicopter of the damage left by Hurricane Ida. Home after home torn to shreds. The full scope of the disaster is still being assessed. Ida came ashore Sunday south of New Orleans. The storm's relentless rainfall swamped communities while wicked winds ripped across the state. Storms usually lose strength after moving over land. That wasn't the case with Ida. After it came ashore, it stayed as a Category 4 storm for 6 hours. The storm knocked out power to more than 1 million homes and businesses. At least one person was killed, and officials fear that number will rise. Ida is now a tropical depression churning through the southern states. As Jennifer Johnson reports, Louisiana and its neighbors are facing a long road to recovery from another historic storm.
Well, that proof is coming. Holy! With winds hitting over 241 kilometers per hour, Hurricane Ida was one of the most powerful storms to ever hit the U.S. It came in as a Category 4 hurricane, but stayed at that level for hours. Almost everywhere you look, there is destruction.
Obviously, Hurricane Ida packed a very powerful punch. She came in and did everything that was advertised, unfortunately.
Thousands of homes and businesses are destroyed. This man thankful his family was not killed by a falling tree.
It's a blessing that it fell to the side instead of straight down the middle, because that's where the bedrooms are.
Hospitals already packed with COVID-19 patients are operating on generators. Trees and power lines are down. Hundreds of roads unpassable.
I've seen damage, but not like this.
There are major power outages and people are without water in Louisiana. Thousands too in Mississippi, meaning no air conditioning in the August heat.
I think people should be prepared for several weeks before the full power restoration comes on. And we're not going to be able to tell you exactly where it's going to come on first.
Whatever you need.
President Joe Biden held a virtual meeting with the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the governors of the states affected by Ida, pledging billions in aid and help.
More than 5,000 members of your National Guard have been activated from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas to support search and rescue and recovery efforts.
Ida roared through Louisiana exactly 16 years to the day that Hurricane Katrina all but destroyed New Orleans and surrounding communities, killing over 1,800 people. Since then, $14 billion have been spent on levees and floodgates, which held up well.
It was pretty intense. A lot of wicked winds. Luckily, no flooding. That's the main difference between this storm and Katrina.
Cleanup and recovery efforts will take months and billions of dollars. But Ida isn't done yet. Her powerful winds are threatening tornadoes, heavy rains, and flash flooding in Tennessee, Kentucky, and the mid-Atlantic states as she charges north. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
The people of Louisiana have faced their share of extreme weather. 5 named storms pummeled the state last year, and the memories of Katrina are still fresh, even though the dangers of riding out a hurricane like Ida are well known. As Mike Armstrong explains, not everyone got out of its way.
It may be a lesson you can only learn by living through a hurricane. You can try to ride it out, but you might end up regretting it.
Last night was rough.
This woman says water started creeping under her door and then got higher and higher.
Ankles, knees, almost chest level, so we just put the dogs on the counters and then we climbed into the attic.
If you're watching this or if you see this, please pray for us.
While some areas made it through without too much damage, others took it on the chin. The roof of this building was pulled off with the resident inside. He posted a video that shows a look of disbelief. There were those who tried to get out, but it appears too late. Several people were rescued on this street by an off-duty member of the Italian Navy. Now, the wind may be done, but in some areas, water is still a problem. Surveillance cameras at a fire station show how quickly the water rose in just 1 hour. A day later, some communities are still flooded. Residents are having to be rescued.
Somebody always tells me some days you live in the water, some days the water lives on you.
It was bad. It was the worst thing ever. It was the worst thing ever. I got my baby out, though. I wasn't going to stop until I get my baby out. Yeah, she all right. Safe and sound.
While in some areas people are still being moved out, in others, evacuees want to go back in. They're being told for now to hold off, and especially not to go sightseeing. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
To the Canadian federal election, the Liberal Party is pushing its climate agenda, promising to protect Canada's big lakes and rivers. Leader Justin Trudeau is trying to paint his party as the environmental choice, but critics say his track record tells a different story. David Aiken is traveling with the Liberal campaign. David?
Well, Robin, Canada has about 20% of the world's fresh water, but only about 7% of the world's renewable fresh water, the kind of water that is replenished by a rainfall. And that's why scientists say Canada needs to be smart about water use and water management, even though we have so much of this stuff.
Canada has the responsibility to be a world leader and invest in freshwater research.
The Liberals say that if re-elected, they'll spend $100 million a year for each of the next 10 years to protect large lakes and river systems. They'll also overhaul a lot of the federal rules around protecting water quality and watersheds, including completing the creation of a new national agency, the Canada Water Agency. With Monday's announcement on clean water and Sunday's on new rules for the oil and gas sector, Trudeau is trying to argue that the Liberal Party has been and will be Canada's greenest government ever.
There has never been a government as ambitious as this one on climate change.
But of course, as the NDP were quick to point out Sunday, Canada's emissions have been rising faster than any of its G7 peers. And of course, the Trudeau government, well, it bought an oil pipeline. Robin?
David Aiken in Quebec. Thanks, David. Speaking of pipelines, a year after the Northern Gateway pipeline project was shelved by the Liberals, the Conservatives are saying they'd support its revival. The idea was to pipe oil from Alberta's oil sands to BC's coast. Leader Aaron O'Toole believes it will help Indigenous communities with economic opportunities. But as Mike Couture reports, some First Nations groups challenged the project, which saw its approval overturned.
And how old is he?
Politics and puppies are a perfect pairing when you're being dogged by other issues on the campaign trail. Aaron O'Toole was talking about animal welfare at this rescue center while trying to pivot away from pipelines.
Le Northern Gateway est un gazoduc, oléoduc important.
Sunday night, on a Radio-Canada interview with all federal leaders, O'Toole said he is in favor of resurrecting the Northern Gateway pipeline, a project that was shelved in 2016 by the Liberals after a federal court of appeal ruled the government didn't sufficiently consult Indigenous communities.
What we have to do is get Trans Mountain built and try and make sure that we get access for our resources, which are leaders in environmental and social governance.
O'Toole believes it would create economic benefits for Indigenous communities along the route that signed economic partnerships. There was plenty of opposition to it, especially in vote-rich BC, where the Conservatives are hoping to win more seats, and where environmentalists point out the effects of climate change are being felt daily.
More billions spent on fossil fuel infrastructure will result in climate breakdown and will undermine all our jobs, the entire economy in Canada and in BC.
O'Toole's position on new pipelines is contrary to the International Energy Agency's report, saying if countries like Canada want to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050, no new fossil fuel projects should be built.
As we see a lower carbon future, we should make sure that democratic countries use Canadian resources, not resources from Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or Russia.
Expect the Liberals, NDP and Greens to zero in on O'Toole's position on another pipeline as those parties attempt to make the environment a key issue of this campaign. Robin?
Mike Couture in Vaughan, Ontario. Thanks, Mike. The Conservatives are gaining ground in the polls, and O'Toole faces a growing chance of becoming the next Prime Minister. But he's being pressed on the climate crisis. As Eric Sorensen reports, this issue is one area where there are clear differences among the parties.
For months, Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole pledged to meet Canada's Paris targets to cut greenhouse gas emissions.
On a un plan d'atteindre nos objectifs de Paris.
Last night, he was more explicit in a French-language interview, making clear he'll stick to the Harper government commitments made 6 years ago, not the new higher pledge made by the Trudeau government.
Mais est-ce que c'est 30 ou est-ce que c'est 40 ou 45?
30%, said O'Toole, which was the Harper target. That would roll back Ottawa's current commitments further behind other Western nations. One research group says the UK has the most aggressive targets, pledging to cut emissions 63% below 2005 levels by 2030. The Biden administration has set a new US goal of 50 to 52% lower. The EU is similar. Canada's commitment is now 40 to 45% under the Trudeau government. The Conservative Party is sticking to emission cuts that are 30% below 2005 levels.
I want us to make sure we meet our commitments. Other countries are a little tardy on their commitments as well.
Justin Trudeau says it comes down to a choice.
Going back to the Harper approach on the environment under Mr. O'Toole, or continuing to be ambitious.
One climate advocate says the Liberal targets aren't good enough, but the Conservative, she says, would weaken them even further, just before nations gather at the next UN climate summit this fall.
Raising ambition is really at the core of the Paris Agreement. Weakening a target that has already been set would be a diplomatic disaster and a failure to recognize that Canada has a large responsibility and capacity to act.
Liberals want to show the stark contrast. One Liberal MP points to several Conservative candidates who downplay the science of human-caused climate change. Trudeau has also pledged to regulate oil and gas with new 5-year emissions reduction targets. O'Toole suggests Trudeau's promises are not credible.
We have to have a plan to get there. Mr. Trudeau says nice things and then doesn't deliver.
The New Democrats have emissions targets steeper than the Liberals and much more so than the Conservatives, but they are running third in the polls as voters consider which party and climate policies they'll support. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
The Conservative Party has confirmed it will not run a candidate in Nova Scotia's Dartmouth-Cole Harbour riding. Conservative candidate Troy Myers was asked to step aside after being accused of sexually assaulting a woman at a work conference in 2019.
We need to make sure that we have a slate of candidates that are here to serve the country and that we show support for victims and zero tolerance.
The deadline to get a party-endorsed candidate has passed, and the Conservatives say it will not be represented. Well, Global National is gearing up to go on the road again. Tomorrow, Donna Friesen will report from Calgary on what could be in store for Alberta this time around, and she joins us with more. Hi, Donna.
Hi, Robin. I am in Alberta this week talking about the federal election campaign. The Liberals were shut out of Alberta and Saskatchewan in the last election. Will it be the same this time around? We're going to talk about the issue of a just transition, what it means to transition from oil and gas to green energy. We're going to take you to the Peyto Glacier in Banff. It's retreating at an unprecedented pace. And I'll talk to the outgoing mayor of Calgary about his 11 years in office and how he feels about politics now and about the future of Alberta. That's all coming up tomorrow.
All right, looking forward to it. Thanks, Donna. The Alberta government has announced it will start rolling out third doses of COVID-19 vaccines for eligible residents. The booster will be available for seniors living in congregate care facilities and immunocompromised Albertans. The province also says mRNA doses will be made available to Albertans traveling to countries that don't accept AstraZeneca or mixed doses. Quebec announced it will also provide a third dose for people who are immunocompromised or on dialysis. For now, the province is not recommending the booster for long-term care patients. The race to control a raging inferno. Coming up, the fears of where California's destructive fire is headed next. Russian cosmonauts say they have found new cracks on the aging International Space Station. They appear to be superficial, but the fissures could widen over time. It's the latest setback for the ISS. In July, it was knocked off position after a new module accidentally fired its thrusters. Last month, an air leak was reported, which caused the air pressure to drop in living quarters. Now to California, where fire crews are scrambling to get control of a massive wildfire near Lake Tahoe. Officials say despite best efforts over the weekend, the so-called Calder fire has picked up steam and it's racing toward the popular resort area. More mandatory evacuation orders are in effect. Since the Calder fire started about 2 weeks ago, roughly 500 homes have been destroyed. We're getting a better sense of just how devastating this year's drought is for wheat farmers in Western Canada. A new report from Statistics Canada estimates this year's wheat harvest will be about 22.9 million tons. That's down 35% from last year, and it's the lowest in 14 years. Canola farmers have also been hit hard. This year's yield is set to drop by 24% compared to last year. Still ahead, the NDP's plan to make the ultra-rich pay. The NDP is starting week 3 of the campaign targeting the ultra-rich. Leader Jagmeet Singh called out previous governments for giving the super-wealthy what he calls a free ride. Abigail Beeman is following the NDP campaign. Abigail.
Robin, the NDP leader started the day in a Liberal stronghold, Ottawa riding, talking about his plan to tax the ultra-rich. Jagmeet Singh says a new Democrat government would invest $100 million in the Canada Revenue Agency to step up enforcement and close loopholes. The NDP leader believes that could bring in $25 billion in revenue, a big and perhaps questionable number based on a parliamentary budget officer's report about how much is lost annually in revenue every year due to tax avoidance. But tackling tax loopholes and taxing the so-called ultra-rich is a long-standing NDP trope. I asked the leader what's different now from 2019 when those promises did not get him elected.
We just saw a bunch of billionaires go to space while people went through the worst economic crisis of their lives. People are pretty frustrated with that.
Jagmeet Singh heads west to Vancouver Island, where the party thinks they have a good shot to unseat one of only 2 sitting Green MPs, Paul Manley, in a former NDP riding as the Greens battle internal turmoil. Robin?
All right, thanks, Abigail. Up next, a young Canadian makes big waves in the Paralympic pool. Parents know how difficult it can be to limit video games for kids. Well, in China, the government is doing it. Beijing is banning minors from playing online games for more than 3 hours a week. Kids will only be allowed to play between 8 and 9 p.m. on Fridays, weekends, and holidays. Video game addiction has been compared to drug use in China. In Tokyo, another young Canadian swimmer is taking home hardware from the Paralympics. New Brunswick's 18-year-old Danielle Dorr swam to second in the women's 100-meter backstroke S7. She even set a new personal best, clocking in at 1 minute and 21.91 seconds. This is her first Paralympic medal. And that is Global National for this Monday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is Hogsback Falls on the Rideau River in Ottawa. Please keep sending your photos to viewers at globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in tomorrow when Donna Friesen will broadcast from Calgary. Until then, have a great night.